Social Impact CX, the podcast that helps you drive mission and make a difference with customer experience.
Hey everyone, and thank you for joining me for the Social Impact CX podcast. I'm John Corrigan, and I'll be your guide to how you can drive mission and achieve social impact with customer experience work. This is episode 24 of Social Impact CX, and again, thanks for listening, as always. This episode is part 3 of my conversation with user experience expert Matt Arnold. This is the third of 3 episodes of Social Impact CX where Matt and I are talking UX and CX. And before we get to the episode, I always have something that I'm grateful for. And today, I'm very grateful for a very specific type of research, and that would be ethnography. Now, everyone that I run across is not necessarily always familiar with ethnography. In fact, it's one of the subjects that I find myself explaining more often than not. Even in the world of customer experience work, where ethnography is particularly valuable and beneficial, I think that ethnography is a bit of an unsung hero, especially in the world of customer research or research used to better understand beneficiaries or clients or whomever. If you're working to get a better understanding of what it's really like from someone else's perspective, what it's like in their shoes, what things look like when seated in their chair, ethnography is really, really important. Ethnography is based on the concepts that come from sociology, which it differs quite a bit from other market research methods many times found out there. Think about going to someone's home or their office or their school or their community center or wherever it is, and sitting down with that person across the desk, in the library, wherever it is, in their living room, at their kitchen table, and asking about a particular experience or a product or a service or whatever it is that you're working with. You know, what did they like, or what did they not like, and how do they recall finding out about it or discovering this part or that part? What are their recollections? How did they feel? How do they feel now? What would they like to do again? What do they hope to never have to do again? It's those types of questions that get you into ethnography work. And what's really interesting, almost always I find, is that when you get results and findings back from ethnography work, and this is qualitative research most typically, your work, when you get the findings back, then really turns to putting yourself in the mode of listening and appreciating and trying to gain a better understanding. Because it does not matter whether someone is right or wrong when they're being interviewed or surveyed here in an ethnography context. That's not what this is all about. Ethnography is not whether you agree or disagree with their recollection or assessment. It's getting to hear and better understand things from their perspective, not your perspective, their perspective. And when you take ethnography into a nonprofit or social impact setting, I think it's really powerful, and the insights can be truly extraordinary. In a traditional for-profit business setting, where you're working to better understand a paying customer's perception of something, which then can lead to greater relationships and loyalty and profits, ethnography can actually lead you to ultimately much better business, better returns for the shareholder, greater profitability, margins, whatever that is that you're working on. But in a nonprofit or social impact environment, the empathy and insights that come from ethnography can lead you to helping more. By understanding better with more insights, and again, not rightly or wrongly, just with greater understanding and empathy, those insights can help you determine where the opportunities are to help more. It's all about your mission, whatever it is you're trying to achieve, whomever it is that you're trying to help. This is all about better understanding from the perspective of the beneficiary or client or maybe the customer so that you can help them more. And that's the magic of ethnography. If you're not familiar with the field of ethnography, I really suggest that it's a place to spend some time and learn more. And that brings us to this episode of Social Impact CX. In episode 22, talking about user experience and customer experience, we started our conversation about UX and CX with Matt Arnold and the subjects of teamwork and design and collaboration and culture. They all came up. And then in episode 23, episode 2 of 3 in this series, we continued the UX and CX discussion with some additional exploration about how do you get started in UX if you're new to it or if your organization is new to UX. And then in this episode 24, which is now part 3 of 3 with Matt Arnold, we'll again cover several topics. And this time specifically, we're going to go into research. And whether you're doing UX or CX work or both together, you'll need to commit to research, which is something I've said before here at Social Impact CX, and I'm taking a guess I will most likely say it again in the future. UX and research, that's what we're talking about in episode 24 of Social Impact CX. So again, let's get back to the conversation with Matt. Let's talk about research, because I think research is so, in the research methodologies, if you begin with the end in mind, now I'm not talking about the research findings.
Yeah.
I'm talking about what type of research you use. And so Social Impact CX and customer experience work, I've talked about ethnography,
Yeah.
And also some of the surveying methodologies with voice of customer in that. Could you talk a little bit about research methodologies used in user experience work specifically?
Yeah, I'd say for us there is actually a wide variety of quantitative and qualitative elements, and another thing that we might, and I'll dig into some of those and make sure that we're explaining those for listeners. I think another thing we do is we'll divide up, and it's not dividing like it's more across a spectrum, but you might have more generative research, or you might have evaluative, right? So even at ACT, that was a lot of evaluative type of research,
right.
Or summative, like at the end, is this thing working the way it's supposed to?
With the test results.
Right, but when you're doing, a lot of ethnographic is also observation for generative, what seems to be going on? Do we understand this space?
Yes.
So we'll look at generative or formative, we'll look at summative or evaluative research. We'll use quantitative measures, quantitative. We're really looking at kind of the what or the size. Also, that's a lot of in business where we're seeing a promise and maybe not a fulfilled promise of big data, right?
Right.
But that's giving us more of, it is giving us numbers back on how we operationalized something. So sometimes we'll talk about what gets measured gets managed.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful on what measurements.
What you measure, exactly. Yeah.
And then also how you articulate that, because sometimes we get stuck measuring things because it's easy to measure, and then we have a business focused on measuring the wrong things.
Yeah.
And so what are good measurements? And then on the qualitative side, that's when we're looking to explain, getting into the whys that sit behind what might be going on. Those we're spending a lot more time with a smaller data set to really understand it. But those sometimes early on we'll be doing observational research, or we'll be doing early interviews and to doing usability tests. Like, are they successful using this product or service, this interface, and using some techniques like think alouds just while they're doing it.
Right.
Just tell us what's going on. Literally think aloud. So what's going through your mind when you're, and that's where while I'm looking at the screen, I'm kind of confused. All right, I think I want to do this. I think that makes sense. And being able to talk to customers or research participants about, okay, what is confusing you? And in the approach for research, looking at research for me is not just data collection, right? It's across this whole activity of how do we plan the research? What are we trying to find out?
Right.
Why is that important to the organization or to us? How do we think we can best collect that information? Then what are the hard realities of time and budget that we have? And so there's always trade-offs to what's the most effective way that we can get better at understanding our customers throughout a product or service life cycle too.
Right. So how do you apply something like A/B testing, where you have version 1, version 2? Which do you like better? How do you create this broader context of what you learn from A/B testing, as opposed to just the you can say 57% of people preferred A.
Yeah.
But there's actually, how do you derive a broader takeaway from that?
Yeah, I think one is making sure we're using it appropriately. I think that's just from a research and ethics side, make sure you're using the right tool for the right purpose. But with A/B testing, sometimes that's getting into, do we have a large enough data set?
Yep.
Right, but there's really robust ways of testing it, and then there's also, for me, maybe more guerrilla style or cheap ways to do that. The more technology we have, so sometimes you might even be testing messaging, and you can do cheap online ads, just even to see, is somebody responding to a color. And just as in this case, the A/B is a version of a variable versus another version. Sometimes we're trying to do that with words. Which word seems to perform more? In the for-profit sector, I was an online channel manager at Best Buy, and the numbers of people that hit the Best Buy website are so high that we could start running an A/B test where certain people are getting different versions of the website, and we would see very quickly what label is performing better. But sometimes in smaller environments, you have smaller numbers, you can't quite measure, but you could do it with your emails too, right? You could test titles, right? Does this subject line respond better? Right. So I'm a big fan of A/B testing. Right. It's just making sure when it's appropriate. Right.
And so I think that gets brought up as an example a lot, but I think there's a couple takeaways. First off, I don't know if those of you listening have listened to the prior episode of Social Impact CX that talked about some basic research methods. While it's great to get qualitative inputs from your colleagues, anecdotal insights from the field, if you will, nothing replaces proprietary input. You got to talk to the customer, to whomever you're serving. Make sure that there is no filter and that you're getting those inputs directly. Yeah. Now, the second part is, I think whether you're using these findings that you have from most likely a qualitative scenario in a guerrilla style, or whether you're making a broader decision on that, is very situational. And I would never discount the value of guerrilla style activities. Let's go test this. Let's go ask a few people and see what flies, what doesn't fly. I think you have to understand what is the broader intent that you're trying to achieve. Are you making a commitment on the scale of what Best Buy would be making? Right. And that may not be the volumes of Best Buy. It may be just it's that important to your organization. Or is this something that, hey, it's new, and the people that we tested, they like this one better, and so we can go with this for now. I think it's really, and then just being conscious about that. So, before you present your guerrilla style findings to a board of directors, you want to understand what this means. It might be fascinating to find out what taking a pulse of the market says, but if you're talking about investment over the next 3 to 5 years for a major initiative or business line, that's a whole different deal, and it's up to you to understand that.
Right. Yeah. So that's, I think, just making sure that you're applying the right technique in the right context.
That's it.
And so part of that is just being very intentional about what are we hoping to learn and how are we going to apply this information.
Okay. So what are the couple of 3 top research methods or tools that you would say for someone who's doing UX work? Is there a greatest hits list?
Well, I think, like you said, A/B, especially for a quantitative, like measuring, is what's working. For me, a lot of think aloud, more on the qualitative side, because that can work with even rough concept drawings, down to high fidelity concepts to something that's in production. So I'm a big fan. I love to consume quantitative data, and I've designed surveys. Actually, out of grad school, my first job was I was a research analyst at a market research company, and I'd have to design quantitative and qualitative studies.
Right.
But I prefer qualitative. I like designers, UX researchers to be able to do interviews. You mentioned ethnography.
Yeah.
Ethnography, I think, is super powerful because it's forcing you to get out of the office.
Yeah.
Because even if you're doing interviews, so a lot of times we're doing those over the phone or through Skype, but really seeing the environment in which somebody is using a product or service is super powerful.
Yeah.
And so I like contextual inquiry. I like doing more ethnographic elements. I also like sometimes we call them ride-alongs. It's just when somebody is doing something. We've done work with a large ag manufacturer, and that really is like riding in a tractor, in the machine, in the combine, to see how does this really work, what's going on.
Right. You always learn something.
Yeah.
You always learn. With my startup Journey Map, the other day I had a Journey Map customer. Their surveys completed, and so it was time for them to pull live a project. And I pulled live a web session, and I asked them if I could go along for the ride. And I learned things. I've done that multiple times in my own projects, and that watching somebody else do it, you never fail to learn. I mean, the worst case scenario is that you may confirm almost everything you know, but I think that would be a highly unusual situation. You almost always gain an insight that you didn't have before.
There's a UX speaker, a guy I think highly of, Jared Spool, does a lot of industry work, and one of the things that he tries to do with his teams is ask that they go no longer than 6 weeks without talking to or observing a customer.
Wow.
And so just that you're always staying in touch. What are they trying to accomplish? We're seeing a lot of that in the innovation space. Actually, there was some deconstruction of the Jobs to be Done framework and some other innovation, like some of Clayton Christensen's work. I wish there was more emphasis put on it, but you'll note there's always a step that's basically talk with your customers. The interesting thing is it's not as easy as just talk to them, right? Because there's a good practice, but being able to talk to customers, ask them questions, or even simply observe them is super helpful.
You never fail to learn something. That's all I have to say. Okay, so let's talk about this in a social impact context. When you think about an organization that has a nonprofit mission, or they've put their social mission first, and then they're going about life as regular business then after, or they're a B corporation or whatever, they have both of those, doing well and doing good at the same time. Do you think what's your lens on UX in that type of environment?
Well, I think, and feel free to rein me back in, because sometimes I think about this as going back to more user-centric or customer-centric practices. Because sometimes I think about the UX elements, though, could be, do the recipients or beneficiaries, do they understand what is happening in a transaction? And so that's where sometimes I think about, in different contexts, different nonprofits. I mean, we shared ACT and the large kind of education mission-driven nonprofit. I was also on the board of directors for a nonprofit theater company, and where we were applying some user-centered design was really trying to understand internal stakeholders, what they really thought the mission and the vision was, and doing a lot of interviews. We did some metaphor related questions. Sometimes those are helpful for me to understand where somebody's coming from, but we were like, if this theater company were a car, what kind of car would it be and why? Because it really helps people think about the attributes. But one of the things that was interesting was most of the board members, I asked if it was a cereal, what would it be? And Frosted Mini Wheats. Because they said sometimes it's sweet on one side, but sometimes it's a little challenging.
It's a lot of fiber sometimes.
Right.
Otherwise, yes.
Right. So, but that gave us insight, and so it was a little bit of design practice to even help articulate the way they saw the world, and then what they saw as challenge. But then we would also try to apply good practice, and so I think that's another element of UX is just how do you make things easier to use? How do you make it easier for customers to do business with you?
I think that's such a huge point. So a lot of companies, if you're talking about a product or a workflow that's dependent upon technology systems or whatever, making things easier to use can kick off a huge political fight.
Yeah.
I think what's really important in a nonprofit scenario is that when you make things easier to use and your ultimate goal is to really help more people.
Yes.
Good UX can actually help you help more people. And if there's more people that can get through the forms you're asking them to do, or more people that can figure out these services are available or whatever, you get a couple more people through to a scholarship or a health clinic or any other number of social services situations. You've just helped more people by understanding how to. If you gain empathy and understanding for what they find challenging, and you can fix something, there's a real result in that.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, I think so. Some of what I'm hearing in that too is also maybe some internal efficiencies that might be gained because you can spend more time working directly on the mission rather than answering questions because somebody's confused or it's not quite working the way they thought it would. Those are ways that UX can help. Yeah. A couple years ago, I was talking to an analyst from Forrester, specifically on nonprofits and why you might take a customer user-centric approach. And it was really interesting because one of the things he said is he was in this case the nonprofits that were more government agencies in this context.
Right.
But he said when things work, people don't complain. When people complain, watchdog agencies start digging in.
Sure.
Right. So if your thing works the way it's supposed to, there's fewer complaints, and then the time that you're spending dealing with watchdog organizations because people are confused, frustrated, or complaining, that's time you're not serving your mission.
Right.
Right. So that's just another. It's kind of abstracted out a little bit, but things that work don't invite lots of problems.
By everything from whether you're reducing friction or providing easier or more meaningful access to something, those are all things that can help to advance your mission. It doesn't matter if you're in a nonprofit or for-profit. No one has a limitless budget. Everybody has some constraint on resources, on people, on dollars, on whatever it is. And so if you take the idea of we're going to better understand how somebody is navigating this path and where they're getting stuck or what they prefer over something else, and then you guide your efforts based upon those findings of how to do better. You can really, if your mission is to help more people or to do good somehow, I think you can do more of it.
Well, and at Handrail, one of our mission is really to drive human understanding. That's our big, and we're trying to help people get there through research. But we also say that good design starts with understanding.
Yep.
So understanding the context, the needs are all critically important. And I know you use the term friction point a couple times. We use that term a lot too. It's so, again, what in goal-based design, what are they trying to do in a particular context? Like, what are they trying to accomplish? And then what are the friction points that are preventing them from doing that?
Yeah.
And that can help prioritize. Like you said, nobody has an unlimited budget, but if we know this is where value is really created for our customers, then we can also organize our internal projects to align.
That's it. And that brings us right back to collaboration,
Yeah.
and it also brings us back to leadership. It really does.
Yeah.
And so, while to be successful in UX or CX work, you're going to have to play a team sport, as you said. I think also you have, if you don't get the full attention of executive leadership at the front end of your project, one of your goals should be to gain their attention as you head down the path, because you're going to find, if you can help more people by changing X or Y, that's why you're all there to begin with, and that goes for if you can sell more stuff as well too. The for-profit scenario, which is actually where I think most of this work comes from, being able to be better in business is great, but when you apply those same principles to here's how we can fulfill our mission to help more people, I think it's even more compelling. And so all right. Okay, so in an ideal scenario, how do UX and CX work together?
In an ideal scenario, I'd say they're well orchestrated.
Yeah.
Everybody's kind of might sound a little bit cliche, but they're all in the boat, rowing in the same direction.
Yeah.
And they all know how their parts contribute to where they're going. So I think it is also understanding what types of projects they might be tackling, and who from a CX approach or a UX approach might be best suited to take point or take lead. It's collaboration, but
right.
I think about kind of alignment.
Yeah.
Clarity of vision, clarity of mission, and then how they're going to get it done.
Right.
And for me, it almost doesn't matter the discipline. It's always can you play well together?
Yeah.
And get stuff done.
Yeah, I think that's it. And UX and CX can live in different areas. In an ideal world, I would structure a CX team with the UX team a key part of it. That doesn't always happen.
Right.
And UX may be distributed across different product or business areas.
Yeah.
CX may actually be something that resides more so in marketing, maybe sales, probably marketing. But what I would encourage anyone, if you find that you're in your business or organization or whatever, if there's UX team members and CX team members in different departments, you do have to band together and form a partnership. Even if I throw away the org chart, that really doesn't. It's not even a germane subject as far as I'm concerned. Success for the organization, whether it's nonprofit mission or whether it's better sales or whether it's loyalty or whatever you're trying to achieve. Brand. I mean, if you're in different departments, that doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't work together. You really should.
Yeah, I think too is like throwing out the org chart. I think that one of the radical things is that a lot of businesses are still organized around kind of the assembly line mentality.
Yeah.
And again, it's hard to be reactive to customer need and changing market conditions, because this is the way we have always done things. This is what has been responsible, and so how do you shake that up a little bit is important.
Well, when you sign up to do UX or CX work, even though this may not be your intent, I think you're going to end up shaking up things a little bit. And if you're in an environment that is, when I worked in technology, I worked in organizations that we ripped ourselves apart and rebuilt the organization every 12 to 18 months. And that was just, at least where I worked, that was a normal thing. In other environments where organizations do not move at that pace, where the marketplace is much more traditional, and the idea of ripping apart your organization every 12 to 18 months and rebuilding it is horrifying to even consider, and impossible to probably do. I think what you have to realize is that if you're doing UX or CX work, you are contributing most likely to change. And so if you're in an environment that's on a continuous cycle of change, you have a really important role. If you're in an environment where change is just a slower pace and it requires a whole different level of effort, it's certainly not on that 12 to 18 month ripping everything apart cycle. I think your change role in UX or CX can actually be almost more radical, or I think more important. That's probably a matter of opinion, but because you get to point out, you get to bring to the conversation how things that are helping the humans or the customers you're trying to serve, how things are going well and how things are not going well.
Yeah.
And in a slower moving organization where it may take a pretty radical decision to make a change that's going to take 2 or 3 years to implement, I would hope that your role in UX or CX you'd contribute to that.
I think so. I think a lot of different elements of change management.
Yes.
Are good things to have in your toolkit as well as a practitioner.
You should have a friend in your HR change management talent team as well too. That you're absolutely correct. Yeah.
I used to work with an organizational designer and change management specialist, and very, very wise woman. And early in my career, one of the things that she helped me out with change management is framing something as, now remember, when you are introducing change, you're killing an old idea.
Yep.
And there are people who maybe built their reputation, as we are we calling your baby ugly, or
right.
we say what you did was wrong. So just being super empathetic about what your changes might bring forward. And the hard part, this has helped me in my career, is also I've been told that we judge ourselves based on our intent, because we know what we're trying to do, but we judge others on their behavior, because that's what we can observe. It's hard to understand people's intent.
Yeah.
And so that's just being very cautious too, as a change agent of any kind, on how you're going to get it done, and is it going to be lasting change.
Right. And I guess we should say there are organizations, I know in the technology world, where UX drives all sorts of decisions. It is embedded in the organization.
Yep.
It's how they do what they do.
Right.
That's not the case everywhere. And so if you're not in an organization where everybody understands that on behalf of the brand and on behalf of the organization and on behalf of next quarter's results, we're going to observe what's good or bad, what's easy, what's hard, what's liked, what's not liked, and we're going to marshal our resources and decisions accordingly. That's not the majority of organizations out there. And
right.
So, and actually, some of the most interesting challenges for UX and CX professionals, I think, are probably outside of those organizations. But it's good to understand the landscape of what you're doing and where you're doing it.
Yeah.
And realize that what you propose with your findings of your customer journey map or your user interface analysis or whatever may resonate much further than just your email to your boss. We've touched on a lot of stuff. Anything else that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, well, we've covered a lot. I think one of the things too is just, for me, is helping people understand like the power of goal-based design and goal-based scenarios is what is somebody really trying to accomplish. So what is the beneficiary or the patient or the student, the customer, the user?
Yeah.
What are they trying to accomplish? In what context, and what's preventing them from doing that? And then how might we improve that for them, or what opportunities are there to change? But I think being able to organize around the customer is critical, right? And it for me, it helps reduce a lot of noise.
At least the ideation, which actually puts us in our closing at yes and.
Yes and.
Yes and. And once again, if you've not read the book Yes and, you should check it out. All right, well, Matt, thank you for your time. All of your insights and your professional expertise and user experience are greatly appreciated.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. And,
all right.
Thanks for the time.
All right, good deal. Thanks.
Take care.
This has been Social Impact CX Podcast Episode 24, which is part 3 of 3 in my conversation with UX expert Matt Arnold. And as I've said before, Social Impact CX is also intended to be an interactive place, a place to stir conversations, answer questions, provide some context and definitions, hopefully achieve a better understanding of customer experience work and user experience work, and all that important research that goes into both UX and CX. So what questions do you have after listening to my discussion with Matt? Questions about user experience or anything else that came to mind as we were talking? You can ask a question or make a comment at Social Impact CX a couple different ways. First, you can send an email to comment@socialimpactcx.com. You can also find us on Twitter and post a question there. Our Twitter handle is SocialImpactCX. And please follow us on Twitter to stay up to date with new podcasts and other related content. You can also find me on Twitter at the handle John F. Corrigan. Or if you're listening to the podcast via YouTube or SoundCloud, please feel free to post a question in the comments section there, and we'll do our best to get back to you. And while you're at YouTube, also please subscribe to the Social Impact CX YouTube channel, where we post videos and other things as well. This is John Corrigan reminding you that, especially in social impact work, it's important to understand that your mission is really all about someone else's journey. And the more you know about someone's journey, the more you can help. Thanks for listening to Social Impact CX.